My name is Naomi Rose. I'm the marine mammal scientist at the Animal Welfare Institute, which is a nonprofit in Washington, D.C. that works to protect animals. And I am focused on the protection of marine mammals, obviously, particularly cetaceans. I have a PhD in biology, and I studied orcas in the wild. And that's why I focus so much on them and their welfare in captivity, which is what my talk is going to be about. Please feel free to send in any questions through the Q&A feature of Zoom. I'll check that periodically throughout my talk. There'll be some natural places for me to stop and pause and look at questions, but why don't we get started? So this is a focus on the welfare of captive orcas. I think a lot of you may be aware of this issue through the film Blackfish, which I'll briefly mention later. All right, hang on. Let's see if we can get this going. There we go. So there are 59 orcas that are displayed in 8 countries. You can see at the bottom where they are. There was a period of time when there were only about 40, 45 perhaps, and that number stayed steady for a very long time. It didn't grow, it shrank sometimes. And then suddenly, a few years ago, it exploded because there was influx of animals through trade from Russia. And I'll talk about that quite a bit later, so I will leave that for now. But 59 orcas, and it went well over 60 at some point, just in the last 5 years or so, but it's back down to 59. So I'm going to focus primarily on welfare, but I will also talk about capture. So the biggest difference between what happens in the wild, what they're used to in the wild, what they have available to them in the wild, and what they have available to them in captivity is space. That's the biggest difference between natural life for an orca and the artificial life that they are given in captivity. So orcas can routinely swim many kilometers, from A to B, straight lines, every day. They can travel as many as 225 kilometers, that's, 140 miles in a single day, right? And they can go 30 to 40 days traveling at this rate without rest. There are animals in the Antarctic that do this routinely every year. And so this is a big, robust animal that has an enormous amount of energy and is capable of feats of endurance that I think are pretty hard for us to imagine. They routinely dive to depths in excess of 500 meters. Multiply by 3 there to get feet. That's 1,500 feet, right? And a shallow dive for them is 21 feet deep. That's a shallow dive, all right? And they are often at 200 meters, which is about 600 feet, and 150 meters, which is 450 feet, all the time, every day. This is their life out in the wild. So here's a comparison, a graph that shows you a comparison. These data came from a tag that was attached to an adult male orca, and Cascadia Research Collective did this work. And you can see the yellow line. This is an adult male. He's swimming down. He gets down there around 600 feet. It's 560 meters. And he's doing something down there. This is the squiggly yellow line near the bottom there. You can see, if you see my cursor, you can see what I'm looking at now. That's activity. He's not just going down there and then coming back up in some sort of slow, sleepy way. He's doing something down there. And it's quite probable that he's foraging. He's going down there and he's catching fish. And then he comes back up, and he does all of that from left to right. That yellow line is about 5 minutes. Okay, so over the course of 5 minutes, he goes down to 525 feet, does something, and comes back up. The little blue rectangular cube in the middle corner of this graph, and again, if you can see my cursor, I'm circling it, is a SeaWorld tank. It's the largest tank at SeaWorld. And there are usually more than one orca put into that tank. See the difference? The deepest tank for any captive orca anywhere is about 10 meters, 11 meters, 35 feet deep. And so typical tanks are 1/10,000th of a percent the size of their natural home range. And understand that this graph is not showing their natural home range. It's showing one dive from their natural home range. These animals are facing a severe reduction in their space, what's available to them when they're put into captivity. This is Lolita. She's at the Miami Seaquarium. This is a U.S. facility, and unfortunately, it's legal. It's the smallest tank anywhere in the world. You can see Lolita here, and and she's in this little space, this little tank. There are a couple of other dolphins with her. There are no other orcas with her, and she's been alone like this for several decades. And the fact that she's survived so long in this enclosure, she's been here since 1970. This is her 50th anniversary in the tank. She's over 50 years old. The reason, just because she survived that long in this tank doesn't mean that this is okay for these animals. There was another whale with her, and he died in 1980. He only survived 10 years. And there have been several dolphins that have come and gone in her tank, her companions, and they haven't survived as long as she has. She has survived this long because she is special. She's just a strong whale. And, as I put it, she's a tough rod. And I don't think that's, something that Seaquarium, the Miami Seaquarium, should be proud of. This is something that I think is really sad for Lolita. She's all alone, she's kind, and this is it. 24/7, 365, this is her life, this little oval tank. So the next big difference between what happens to them in the wild and what happens to them in captivity is their social companions, their social groupings, their society. So in captivity, they have very limited social environments. This is Kiska. She's in marine land of Canada. She also, like Lolita, is all alone, but she doesn't even have dolphins to be her companions, because when they tried to do that, put other species in there to be her companions, she was quite aggressive toward them. So she is literally all alone. These are incredibly social animals, incredibly family bonded animals. And this is what they're provided in captivity. Far too often, this tank is actually bigger than Lolita's tank, but it's just as featureless. Those rocks in the background are for you, not for Kiska. And she literally floats around like this a lot during the day. That's really all she does. So this very dynamic animal is reduced to this. Environmental quality and complexity are other things that very, very much differ between captivity and the wild. So again, in captivity, it's a swimming pool. I mean, in fact, this looks very much, if you ask me, like a hotel swimming pool, and that's exactly what they are. The features in them, they're concrete, they're often painted light blue, as you can see. They're highly reflective, which isn't good for their eyes. In the wild, when they want to escape the glare of the sun, they simply dive deep. Water filters out UV radiation after a certain depth, and that's not happening here. So they're actually exposed to UV radiation at a rate that isn't normal, and they have no way to escape it. There's nothing to do in tanks. Sometimes there's toys in there with them, and of course there are 2 whales here, and in fact there's a couple of other whales in this tank with them. But if they're just having an off day and they don't actually want to be with those particular whales, that's too bad. They don't have any choice in the matter. They're held with whoever wants to hold them. So this is a unfortunate situation where a very intelligent, very social, very dynamic animal is held in a box. There are zoos and aquariums that can provide semi-natural enclosures for the species they display, but that is not true for orcas or, in fact, any other cetacean in captivity. This is one of the whales at Marineland in France. And again, you can just see this is plexiglass. She's just floating there. The tank is actually, quote unquote, quite large compared to other tanks, but still quite small compared to the ocean. And still, this is what they do a lot during the day. Nothing at all. They just float. And that is not natural. Again, whales are always moving even when they're resting. They don't sleep the way we sleep. They half of their brain off at a time. It's called unihemispheric sleep. And they have to stay somewhat alert because they have to breathe. They're voluntary breathers. These are mammals who breathe air just like we do. And if they fell asleep the way we do, which is to lose consciousness, would literally drown. They would forget to breathe. They would just sink and wouldn't come up again, and they would drown. So they actually only turn off half their brain at a time, and they keep swimming. But again, in captivity, they log. This is logging. Logging is literally what it sounds like, acting like a log, just floating at the surface, doing nothing at all. And they're not asleep. They're not resting at all on a daily basis. I have no idea what they're doing. I actually think that they're kind of zoning out in a way that is a coping mechanism for the boredom. And by the way, boredom is a lot worse than it sounds. I mean, when you guys get bored, that's one thing. But when an animal gets bored, it can lead, an intelligent animal gets bored chronically and persistently. It can lead to depression. And depression, as we all know, is a very serious mental illness and can lead to all sorts of problems. And finally, they have behavioral restrictions. Remember, I told you these are very dynamic animals. They're always moving and they're always hunting. We have marine mammal orcas, marine mammal eating orcas, which hunt and kill seals and sea lions, penguins, other whales. And then we have fish eating orcas, which herd schooling fish and cooperatively forage with other whales to herd these fish or eat individual fish like big salmon. And that's a full-time occupation. It's their job. And that is completely taken away from them in captivity. Their career, their job is taken away from them. And again, when you're unemployed, it can be very depressing, and eventually depression can harm you. So in the wild, orcas are top marine predators. Okay? This is when they're hunting marine mammals. They're taking seals and sea lions. They're taking other whales and dolphins. The one on the right there has knocked a Dahl's porpoise, that's the little porpoise on the right there, right out into the air. Just rammed it and thrown it into the air, preparatory to killing it. So this is an extremely aggressive, dynamic, and scary hunter when they're in the wild. But in captivity, they just beg for fish, dead fish, from the sky. Food comes from the sky. Of course, food does not come from the sky. In the wild, it's underwater or at the surface, and yet in captivity, dead fish just fall into their mouths. And that begging posture you see there with mouth open as their head is above the water is a posture that you only see in captivity. If you see whales with their heads up like that, their mouths are always closed in the wild, because what they're literally doing is looking around. They're looking around, they have good eyesight above the water, and they're looking around for landmarks and so on to navigate. But they never have their mouths open, because why would they? There's no purpose to that. Whereas in captivity, the purpose is to catch the fish that fall from their trainer's hands. And so that posture with the mouth open like that is a captive posture and is not natural. Fish herding for the fish-eating marine mammals, the ones that don't eat marine mammals, look at that. That's a herring ball. That is a cooperatively caused herring ball. In other words, 2 or 3 whales have cooperated to herd all of those herring together and form that ball. They're all schooling together like that in panic. And then they take turns going through the herring ball and just grabbing herring. And keep the other 2 or 3 whales take their turns and make the herring ball tight and together so that the next hunter can go through and grab his or her fish. So this is an extremely cooperative behavior. Even though they don't hunt marine mammals, they still need to cooperate to hunt fish. And then again, this is the Miami Aquarium, this is Lolita performing, and the industry, the public display facilities will tell you that their performances are educational, but as you can see, they're not really. This is just entertainment. So what are the impacts of captivity on these intelligent social creatures? The biggest effect there's 2 big effects, which I'll talk about, that you can see. They're easy to see. There are other effects like depression that are far more insidious and far more difficult to see. But here's one that's really obvious. Their teeth. Okay, this animal, sorry for the grisly picture, but this animal has died. It's been found stranded on a beach. Somebody took a picture of its teeth. Look at those teeth. That's why they're such feared predators. They're big, they're conically shaped, kind of like traffic cones, and they interlock and they are fierce, right? And this is what their teeth look like in captivity. Very common. This is true for 70% of the animals in captivity have some form of dental damage. The worst is the upper one. That's just teeth worn down to the gum line. You can see that the pulp is exposed. They're literally cavities just exposed to the air. It hurts just like you can imagine it would hurt your teeth. The way their teeth get like this, just shaved down to the bone, is through grinding them on the concrete walls when they're bored. It's It's called a stereotypy. It's a neurotic, repetitive behavior that has no purpose, and it's actually self-harming. The whale on the bottom, you can see the upper teeth look pretty normal, and that's actually one of the reasons why we know this isn't normal. The damage is asymmetrical. The upper teeth are often normal. The lower teeth are the ones that get broken and ground down because that's how they grind their teeth on the walls. They're doing it so that it's their lower teeth that are being ground. They really can't shift their head to grind their upper teeth very easily. And the one on the lower is not so much ground down as broken. And again, their pulp is exposed. You can see that they're cavities. And the teeth broke because they were either grinding them on the concrete and cracked them, or they were actually biting at the metal gates that separate their enclosures in aggression to a whale on the other side, perhaps. And they just broke their teeth. And again, it hurts. It's a very painful thing. And when they get dental care after this, because those are cavities and they are pathways for pathogens, for bacteria, for all nasty germs that can get into their system, they have to get those teeth cleaned every day with antibiotic or antiseptic, wash. Just like you brush your teeth, they have to get that. They can't be filled. They cannot fill their teeth, like you do your cavities at the dentist, because they live in the water. And anything that they tried to fill the teeth with would simply get washed out before it hardened. And so they simply have to wash the interior of the teeth with antiseptic wash every day. And again, it's probably not a very pleasant experience for the whales, and it probably hurts. And in fact, I believe bad dentition is one of the reasons why these whales don't live as long in captivity. And this is a paper that was written a few years ago, I think 3 years ago now. And this is where I got the 70% data from. Almost every whale in captivity has some teeth damage, some dental damage, but many of them, up to a quarter of them, have severe dental damage. And so again, this is not something you see in the wild. There are a couple of populations that wear their teeth down to the gum line, but those are animals that are feeding in a way that causes that. In other words, it's a lifetime process. It happens because of the way they feed, and it's probably bad for them. It probably allows them to get more infections, and they probably don't live as long as whales that have those beautiful teeth I showed you in the other picture, where they have undamaged teeth. And so it's a population-wide problem that's a function of foraging. Well, this isn't the damage you see on the right here isn't from foraging. Dead fish just get dropped into their mouths. It's probably from, as I said, this grinding process, but interestingly, the facilities will argue it's because of them playing with toys. And there are no toys that these animals are given that would grind their teeth down like this. Again, in the wild, it's because of the way they feed. Their food causes their teeth to wear, and it is probably not good for them. In captivity, all of their toys are soft. They're plastic or rope or something like that, and it's not going to cause this problem. It's the grinding on hard surfaces like concrete and metal, and they won't admit that. And so again, it is probably a health problem in the wild. Is definitely a health problem in captivity. And again, this is not news. Bad teeth leads to bad health, even in humans. The mammal problem. So why the facilities, in the industry fights this logical conclusion so hard, you can judge that for yourself. And then the second thing that's really, visually obvious, the difference between the wild and captivity, is dorsal fin collapse. So in captivity, this is what you see. This is Tilikum, the whale that was featured in the film Blackfish. And as you can see, his dorsal fin is completely collapsed over his back. This is the way it always looks for adult males in captivity. 100% of the adult males in captivity have a collapsed dorsal fin like this, either to the left or the right side. And it matters, the difference between the left and the right side collapse is the direction they prefer to swim in. Because, if they're neurotically swimming in the same direction every day, it's going to push the fin over to one side. And by the way, they're not born like this. They're born with perfectly normal fins. The fin is not supported by bone or cartilage. It's only supported by connective tissue and fatty tissue. And in the wild, it will grow straight and tall because water pressure on either side of the fin supports it as they swim through life. As the dorsal fin grows, as they grow, and they swim through life, water pressure is keeping it straight and tall. And if you go up to it and you try to move it, not that I would advise you to do that out in the wild, but if you went up to it and tried to move it, it would wobble a little, but it would be, relatively rigid. And so adult males, it happens because their dorsal fins are so tall. Females, their dorsal fins are shorter, and gravity is what's pulling it over after all, since they're always at the surface of the water in captivity, whereas in the wild, they've got water pressure because they're always out at the surface of the water. And so female dorsal fins are short enough that they don't actually feel the pull of gravity as much, but males do. And so in the wild, you occasionally see this. This is a wild whale, and you notice his dorsal fin is collapsed in an odd way. The base is normal, but the top has just completely fallen over. This happened as an adult. Somebody shot this whale. And that happens in the wild. It's a challenging and sometimes dangerous place out in the wild, but these whales have, for the most part, evolved to deal with those challenges, but not bullets. And so this has happened because the interior of the dorsal fin after the wound healed, lost its integrity. All of that fatty and connective tissue just and the dorsal fin collapsed in this way. But you can see it's not the same way. It's not because it grew that way. It literally fell over. It collapsed at the midpoint because of an injury. This is what it's supposed to look like. This is a wild whale leaping out of the water, and look at that dorsal fin. That is what is normal. So there is no way that upper left picture of Tilikum is in any way normal, and yet the industry told its audiences for decades that it was perfectly normal for the dorsal fins to look like this. They've only started telling the truth in the last 5 years. That's what we call the blackfish effect. They've had to come clean. They've had to start telling the truth because of the movie and all of the public pressure they face. And so this is, in fact, in the lower middle photograph, what they're supposed to look like. And again, that grew that way from a baby to an adult because water pressure kept it growing straight and tall. That water pressure is absent in captivity because the tanks are shallow and they're always at the surface performing, and gravity pulls it over. As far as survivorship is concerned, all this talk about how long do they live in captivity versus the wild. The data are not very clear, and of course, different populations of whales in the wild will live different lifespans because of their environment. All right, that's the same thing for human beings. Life expectancy in countries in Africa is not the same as life expectancies in Northern Europe, for example. If you want to live a really long time, go live in Scandinavia. That's where life expectancy is longest. If you don't want to live a long time, and you're still a human being, mind you, the same species, go live in, equatorial Africa because it's a harder life there. Environment is tougher. That's the same thing with these animals. But if they live in a good environment, if they live in a place where there's food and life is pretty good, they can live into their 50s, 60s, 70s, even their 80s and 90s for females. Females usually live longer than males in most mammals. And so, this is what they could do if everything was fine. And so everything's supposed to be fine in captivity, but clearly it's not. Because in fact, in captivity, they only live as well as endangered and threatened populations in the wild. So that's nothing to write home about. Captivity challenges these animals with pressures that are similar in effect to whatever they're facing in threatened and endangered environments. So starvation or pollution or whatever it is that's causing them to be endangered or threatened in the wild is just as effective as, stress, boredom, neuroses, depression, and so on in captivity. Because when you're depressed, when you're bored, you're more susceptible to illness. So an infection that you could fight off if you were happy and healthy in the wild might kill you in captivity. So I'm not saying they're doing anything deliberately to harm these animals. I'm just saying being in captivity harms these animals. And if you notice the top figures, what it's saying there, certain milestones in a life cycle, a lifetime, is much poorer in captivity than it is in the wild. Very few animals make it to sexual maturity in captivity, about less than half. And very few animals make it to menopause, females make it to menopause in captivity. And menopause is also, a fairly unique situation. Very few mammals actually experience it. They reproduce until they die. But in orcas and in humans, females have value beyond reproduction. They have knowledge. They have nurturing skills. They are valuable members of society in general, and so they survive past their ability to reproduce. That's actually very rare in mammals, birds, anything. And humans are one species that does it, and so are orcas, and they can live 50 years past their reproductive lifespan. And so notice that in the wild, almost half of the females have a long menopausal life, post-reproductive life, but very few. Lolita being one of them, by the way. Lolita, the whale that was over 50 years old, is one of those 7%. So then, looking at research and conservation, that's another argument that they offer us to say that it's important for them to have these animals in captivity, that it educates their audiences, that it's valuable for conservation, the research they do on them. That's actually not even true by their own reckoning. They say it and they expect you to believe them, but if you look at the data, it doesn't support it. So only 11% of published peer-reviewed papers on orca research are even using captive orcas. Only 11% of all the papers that are published out there on orcas use captive orcas as research subjects. And very few of those are actually conservation papers. They are mostly husbandry papers. How to keep orcas in captivity, what to feed them, what illnesses they suffer from, and so on. Right? And so this is a situation that the industry itself determined. Even though as a public relations matter, they tell you these animals are vital for research and education. In fact, when you look at the published literature out there in scientific research journals, that's not supported. So now I'm going to tell you a little bit about how these animals are captured. And this is more important than ever because, as I mentioned at the top of the talk, very recently, they have started capturing orcas again. So for many, many years, they captured orcas in the United States, in Washington State, in British Columbia, in Canada, and in Iceland. So all the way up until the late 1980s. Orcas were being caught in the wild, but it became very controversial around then. And so, well, it was controversial from the beginning, but it became very controversial in the 80s. And so they stopped. Everybody stopped. It was illegal in the United States after 1976, and it became illegal in Iceland after 1988 or so. And no place else was capturing them at that time. And so everybody was trying to breed them in captivity and maintain the numbers of orcas they displayed through captive breeding. But around 2000, Russia started thinking about, hey, there's a bunch of new facilities in China, there's even new facilities in Russia and elsewhere in the world, and let's see if we can't be the supplier of orcas. So just look through this slide, it just shows you 2003, 2013, 14, 15, 16. So in 2016, there were 15 orcas that we knew had gone to China from Russia, and that there were also 3 orcas in Russia itself, a brand new facility in Moscow that's performing right now. And so we knew of at least 18 surviving wild-caught orcas from Russian waters in China and Russia. Several of them had died, not in captivity, but during the captures. So it's a very traumatic, horrible experience to be caught in the wild. You're a young whale, you're with your mother, and you're just traumatically separated from her. Everybody's literally screaming. I mean, the noises they make during capture operations are very, very horrible to hear. And these mothers are having their toddlers basically taken from them. And so this is a very, very grim situation. And the trauma is real. And these animals probably do suffer from a form of post-traumatic stress disorder. And then they're sent to a concrete box with other whales they may not even know. And it's all just terribly traumatic. It really is. These are social animals that are bonded to family for life, and this is how they're treated when they're wild caught. And so a lot of these whales actually when we capture, called capture stress or capture myopathy, and they can't survive the trauma. But many of them do survive, and we know of 18 now from these captures, just in these few years here, that are now in captivity. Well, in 2016, they suspended the captures for a couple of years. And we were quite thrilled about that. We thought, oh, the controversy and the public outcry have ended this brief experiment in returning to wild capture. But in 2018, they resumed. This is a capture vessel. If you look again, I hope you can see my cursor, but there's this blue tarp on the deck near where these men are standing. That's actually a capture case, a capture container. It's about as long as a young whale would be, and they are put in there. It's basically like a coffin, and they're put in there belly down so that they're facing forward, and they're taken. That's how they're transported all over the world, and on planes and on boats and on trucks. And so in 2018 they started these captures again, and I think they suspected that if they did this again, it would be equally controversial as it was before, and so they better do as many as they could in a single go before the authorities cracked down again. So they also captured beluga whales, the white whales that you may have seen in pictures, and that was their more lucrative, more common species to capture, because there's a lot of places that display belugas in China, for example, whereas only a couple display orcas. And they just thought, well, let's just go out there and get as many belugas and as many orcas as we possibly can manage. And they put 9 and 11 orcas in a holding. This is an aerial view of the holding facility in the summer of 2018. Normally, they would catch about 20 to 40 belugas in a single season, and maybe, as you saw from my previous slide, 1 to 4, maybe 8 in a single season. But this time they caught 90 belugas, so 3 times as many or so, and 11 orcas, about twice as many. All of those little white bodies you see in these tank or pens, sea pens, are belugas. So there's about 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. So there's about 9 belugas in each one of these little pens, and you can see their bodies. They're kind of like goldfish in a bowl. Underneath this area, the covered area on the right, upper right, that's where the orcas were held. Of these whales in 2018, 4 died or were released. We think they died, 4. So by the winter of 2019, we were pretty sure there were only that those 4 had died, that they had not escaped, although that's what the capture operators said. 3 of them were belugas, and 1 of them was an orca. And we're pretty sure we even know which orca it was. He wasn't doing well when outsiders went to look, and then he was gone. And they say he escaped, but he probably died. However, public pressure was enormous against this, what was called the whale jail. And if you Google that, you'll get a lot of information about this. And so they literally were receiving letters and visits, and the media, and President Putin even got involved. And so eventually the pressure was too much for the Russian government. They decided they were going to order these capture operators to release the remaining 87 belugas and 10 orcas. And they did. Over the course of the next few months, from about, I would say, June of 2019 until November, they released all of these whales. The last 50 belugas, they tried to hold on to sell them to China, but even those 50 were eventually released. None of them entered trade. And that's extremely important politically. They invested a lot of money in capturing these whales, and they made no profit. They didn't make they didn't end up in the red, I don't think, because the government compensated them, but they didn't make a profit. That's what business is all about, right? So we're very hopeful. We're not sure yet, but we're very hopeful that this will not happen again. And we're working very hard in Russia right now to make sure it doesn't happen again. You saw Blackfish. This was a very widely seen film because it was shown on CNN and Netflix, and millions of people saw it, which is not typical for a documentary. There's also 2 books. One was Death at SeaWorld, which was published the year before Blackfish was released. I'm featured in Death at SeaWorld, so I want to put in a plug for it for my own sake, and also for David Kirby, the author's sake. It covers the same ground that Blackfish did, but in more detail. And Beneath the Surface, John Hargrove is featured in Blackfish, and then he wrote his own book about his experiences. So I recommend all 3 of these to you if you want more information than what I've provided in this presentation. I've done a TEDx talk. That's me down at the bottom there. Let's throw Shamu a retirement party. A lot of the information I provided to you today is in that TEDx talk, but also some stuff I didn't. Some more information about them in the wild. Some of the really fascinating, amazing facts and figures about these animals are in this talk. So I do recommend it, obviously. But again, if you are interested in more information, this TEDx talk is on YouTube. And that's the URL at the top, but just Google Let's Throw Shamu a Retirement Party. I work in China as well. I've visited that country 3 or 4 times now to raise public awareness, because that's the market right now. China is expanding its public display industry for cetaceans, for whales and dolphins, at a very rapid rate. There were only 40 facilities in 2015, only 40 facilities in 2015, and now there are well over 80. So in only 5 years, they've doubled, more than doubled, the number of facilities they have. These facilities hold belugas, bristled dolphins, bottlenose dolphins, false killer whales, and orcas, and in very poor conditions, because most of the time these facilities are thrown up willy-nilly, poor construction standards, and the trainers don't know what they're doing. They're treating these animals like they're seals or sea lions, or for that matter, land mammals. They literally don't know how to handle them, and they don't live very, very frequently from these very traumatic captures. They're wild caught, they are not successfully breeding them in captivity, and so they're traumatized. And so they're suffering from this PTSD-like symptoms, and they don't live very long. So we've done 2 editions, one in 2015 and one just updated in 2019. Again, these ocean theme parks, a look inside China's growing captive cetacean industry. Just Google it, and you should be able to find these reports online. We've done some scientific papers. The Harmful Effects of Captivity and Chronic Stress on the Well-Being of Orcas is a paper we published just last year, and it summarizes almost all the data I just gave you. All of those scientific research papers I had on the screen, and a review of the literature, and also bringing in medical doctors. Some of the authors on this paper are not cetacean biologists at all, they're medical doctors, and they are very well versed in post-traumatic stress disorder, and they have contributed to our analysis of the data. And this is a poster we did at a conference in December, so this is very recent, but the paper is also very recent. And again, if you Google this, Lori Marino is the first author, I'm the second author, and Chronic Stress on the Well-Being of Orcas should bring up the paper. It is not publicly available, it is behind a paywall, but we do have copies of it that we're happy to give up for free. It's just the manuscript, it's not the formatted journal article. And if you email me, I can send you a copy of this. So that's my talk. I'd be happy to answer any questions. I'm on social media. From the Dolphin's Point of View is my Facebook page, and at From Dolphin Point of View is my Twitter feed. And I'm always happy to answer questions. My email is here as well. And it's part of my job, so don't hesitate to send me an email with a question if you don't want to ask it today. But please do right now to ask me any questions that you would like. So I'm looking at the Q&A feature on the Zoom, and I don't see any questions. I hope I'm not doing anything wrong here. Oh, I'm so sorry. I didn't even see any of these questions from before. It looks like some people were having trouble with hearing me. I hope that it worked out all right in the end. So again, any questions? If not, I'm happy to say thank you everybody for your attention. Just let me know. Oh, I see a question. All right. My favorite part of studying orcas, that's one question. I spent a lot of hours out in the field with them. I don't have any pictures of that, unfortunately, because that was way back in the 80s, prehistory. And so all of my photos are on film. And I've never gotten the time to scan most of them in. But anyway, I spent hours and hours on the water, following these whales as they went about their daily lives. And I saw so many things that you don't see unless you spend that kind of time with them. I saw young animals starting to explore the world and take more and more time away from their mothers, the mothers hovering anxiously in the background. I saw males playing with each other. They are unlike most species where one sex or the other leaves the family group and emigrates to another population. This is a way of avoiding inbreeding. Orcas stay in their family groups, just like we do. And the reason they don't inbreed is because it's taboo. You don't mess around with your family. First cousins even aren't that good as partners. You don't do that because it's genetically problematic. It's something they're smart enough to know not to do, basically. And so they can live at home, but all the same, young boys, as we all know, can be pretty, roughhousing, and they have a lot of energy, and so they do what young boys do in humans. They play football and they play soccer and they go out and they roughhouse. And watching males do that, play very roughly sometimes, but it's not aggression, it's play. It's fascinating. Seeing a group of 100 orcas all together all at once, just amazing stuff. I mean, I will always treasure the time I spent on the water with these animals. I am not a field biologist anymore. I work in policy and advocacy. I'm in Washington, D.C., but I still get a chance every once in a while to be out on the water with them, or to be on shore when I can see them out in the water. And I prefer that, actually, because then my engine isn't bothering them. And in July, I'll be in Washington State and I'll be seeing whales. So that's all I get now. Back in the day, back in the 80s, I was spending all summer long with them, and I really do miss that. What's a success story you've experienced in studying orcas? Well, most of my success stories are from my advocacy, from my time as an advocate, which started in 1993. So 27 years now, I've been working to protect these animals. And I'd say one of the biggest successes, there's been several, and the whole blackfish effect is the success. But I'll give you a smaller success story that's nevertheless really big. There was a company, I won't name names, that wanted to capture dolphins in Panama, the country of Panama. They wanted to go there and build a dolphinarium, build a dolphin exhibit, and have several dolphins of their own to put on a show for tourists, but also to capture more and sell them around the world. They were going to be dolphin brokers. And they put in permits in Panama. They thought Panama would be a perfect place to do it. And they put in their permits, and they actually started building the dolphinarium. They broke ground, and they started digging the holes that would become the building and the tank and all of that would be their dolphin exhibit. And we stopped that. I went down there 2 or 3 times over the course of a couple of years, and we met with people like the mayor of the municipality where they were going to have this facility, and we met with the government, and we met with the media, and we did public presentations, and we just pushed and we pushed and we pushed, and we debated the capture operators and the facility owners themselves, and we won. And they rescinded all the permits. and they had to abandon the building site. The hole was starting to be dug, and they had to just leave it all there in disarray because all of their permits were taken away from them. And so that was an amazing success story. Do orcas mate for life? No. No. That's very rare. Birds do it a lot, mostly because two parents are needed to feed a baby bird, because they don't, obviously, mother birds don't produce milk, right? They have to dig up worms and bugs and all of that and feed them. And so both parents are needed. Monogamy, mating for life, is very rare in mammals. We're an exception. And there's only a couple of other species that do it, and orcas aren't among them. What's interesting is, although there's no paternal care, so fathers are not in the picture, there's sibling care. So males do care for young whales. Adult male orcas do care for young orcas, but not their children, their siblings. They take care of their younger brothers and sisters, sort of as a way to pay rent to their mother, who allows them to stay home. And again, this is because adult males can be disruptive. Certainly adolescent males can be disruptive. They are full of juice, they're full of energy, they want, they're always looking for girls, and it becomes an issue socially. And so one of the ways to pay their mother back for tolerating that is they babysit their younger siblings. Any other questions? And I was asked for my email again, and it's not on the screen anymore, so I'll just give it to you all. It's Naomi, my first name, Naomi, at awionline.org. Naomi at awionline.org. And again, I'm always happy to answer emails. Somebody asks, since visiting China, are there any other places you want to spend time in researching orcas? Again, I do not research orcas anymore. I wish I did. I've loved being in the field with them. I protect them. I work to protect them through policy, through changing law and regulation. So I spend a lot of time talking to officials, talking to government people, talking to the media. I do a lot of sitting around and in meetings, task forces, and testifying at hearings and so on. I've testified before Congress 4 times because of proposals to either weaken or strengthen marine mammal laws. And so what I do now is when I travel to another country like China, I'm not going to see the animals or research the animals. I'm going to talk to people to try to protect them, strengthen the regulations or the policy that surrounds, in this case, keeping them in captivity. But it could also be aspects about their lives in the wild, like protecting them from fishing entanglement, or protecting them from noise from human activities, protecting them from pollution. So I do travel all over the world for that. I've traveled to at least 56 countries now. And the next new country I'll be in, I don't know. I've been to China, I've been to Africa, I've been to other places in Asia, South Korea, Japan, Singapore. So I don't know where next I'll go. I will be probably in China again this year if the coronavirus outbreak, which you've probably heard in the news lately, is resolved. If it's not, I won't. But I may go back to Russia. I've been to Russia a couple of times as well. We are trying, of course, as I said, to prevent any more captures in Russia. So I may be going back to Russia. It all depends on where the hot spots of bad behavior, bad human behavior toward marine mammals is going on, and where the next meeting I have to attend is. And so I don't know what new country, my next new country will be, but last year my new country was Ecuador. I went to Ecuador for the first time. There are questions in the Q&A waiting to be answered. Oh dear, I'm not sure how to get to there anymore. Oh, there it is, 5 questions. Have you written any books? I have written chapters in books, several actually chapters in books, but I literally don't have the time right now to write a whole book by myself. I'm hoping that when I retire, I will write some sort of memoir. If you want to read about me in a book, Death at SeaWorld, I'm featured in that book by David Kirby. So please do go and see, and you'll learn a little bit more about me if you go there. But in terms of writing my own books, mostly book chapters. I've written about 5 or 6 book chapters. There's a rumor going around that SeaWorld is closing. Is that true? I don't know. I've heard that rumor. I doubt that they'll close, but they may they may sort of, what's the word when you sort of just redo your entire business model? And they may become more about rides rather than animal attractions. I really don't know. I'm concerned about that. There are a lot of animals at SeaWorld, and they will all need homes. They will all need someplace to go if SeaWorld does close down. I've never wanted to close SeaWorld down. I just wanted them to change their business model and stop breeding the animals they have so that they can care for the ones that are alive now and have them be the last generation. So that's what I say to someone who wants to visit SeaWorld, which is another question I have here. I just want them to change their business model. And so what I say to people who want to visit there, I say, go and ask questions and see what kind of answers you get. And when you get the answers, don't just believe them. Do some of your own research after you get those answers and see if they were telling you the truth or not. They have they've been misleading people, and in some cases outright lying. Some of this is outlined in Blackfish, in the film. You can actually see the docents. They're not lying to you because they, are bad people. They're lying to you because that's what they were taught to tell you when you ask those questions. How long do orcas live? 35 years. Well, that's not true. As I mentioned earlier, they can live into their 80s or 90s. So they were trained to tell you that by somebody higher up who is trying to lie to you. Have I been in any movies? I've been in several documentaries. I've been in about 6 documentaries, I'd say now. The most recent one is called Long Gone Wild, and it is now currently available on a number of streaming services, and it came out last year. So Long Gone Wild, and it's about it's basically the post-Blackfish update by a different filmmaker named Bill Neal. So if you want to see that, it's available on several streaming services. So Long Gone Wild. So, but I've been in about 4 or 5 other documentaries over the years. What are your best strategies for raising awareness? What are your best strategies for raising awareness in different countries? It depends on the country. Cultures are different. And I always work with local activists. I never, ever, ever go to a country and just say, this is how it's going to go. Because I'm an American, and I could be completely wrong in my approach in Ecuador or China or Russia. It depends on the culture, the local culture. And so you work with local activists who know their own country, know how best to try to communicate to the public, and you go from there. So I have no strategies other than that. Work with the locals. Always temper and tailor your argument to what will work in that country, in that culture. Some cultures are okay with being told what to do. Don't go see the show. Other cultures need to be persuaded that there are better alternatives. Why don't you go parasailing or cruising or go to a terrestrial wildlife park that's a sanctuary for chimpanzees or something like that. Wildlife ecotourism, is something I also work on here and there, and that's a way of trying to persuade people that they have clout. Where you spend your tourist dollars matters. Spend it here where they're trying to take care of wildlife rather than there where they're exploiting wildlife. So that's sort of one way of looking at it. And what kind of animals or ecosystems are you trying to advocate for in the future? Well, I'm a marine mammal biologist. I'm an orca biologist. So that's all I do. If it doesn't swim in the ocean, I don't know much about it. Is what I always say. Really true. I know a lot about a lot of animals, but I really know marine mammals and cetaceans, whales and dolphins in particular. So that's it. I do not, I'm not a broad spectrum wildlife advocate. I'm a marine mammal advocate. Where are we? What are the chances that you can get SeaWorld to fund the whale sanctuary project? That would be amazing PR for them. Oh, indeed, it would be. We'll see. I mean, I've pointed out for several years now that it would be a win-win for SeaWorld to join the sanctuary movement, trying to build whale and dolphin sanctuaries. Believe it or not, there aren't any. Well, there's one now, but up until recently, there have been none. There are chimp sanctuaries, there are elephant sanctuaries, there are bear sanctuaries, big cat sanctuaries, wolf sanctuaries. These are places that are semi-natural, they're enclosed, but they allow the animals to experience more of what they would have if they were wild, but they are not wild because captivity has taken away their ability to be independent in the wild. They have handicaps, whether they're physical or mental, that do not allow them to be independent. So they are still in an enclosure, but it's huge and it's filled with natural features. And it's an effort to give them back some of what that was taken away from them in a circus or a bad zoo or wherever they've been rescued from. There are no whale or dolphin sanctuaries, or there's just one that's going online there right now. In fact, I'll be there in June, and it's for belugas, and there are only 2 belugas in it right now, but hopefully that one will be successful. But the point is that we are trying to build sanctuaries for whales and dolphins, and SeaWorld steadfastly refuses to get on board that train. So what we're hoping is that if we can show that 1 or 2 of them are successful and work, that they'll finally understand that it's in their best interest, that they will be heroes if they join that movement.